certainly encourage all partners in this, all stakeholders, including ministers in the DFT, but also in Welsh Government, who are responsible for highways, of course, to engage with the rail network enhancement pipeline in the usual way, or consider future rounds of the Levelling Up Fund. I would say that the honourable gentleman has made a very, very powerful case for that level crossing and the wider strategic benefits that will flow if this problem is sorted out.
Tony Antonio.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now, I know that the Minister shares my disappointment and that of my constituents in Gower about the lack of electrification to Swansea. But is the Minister aware that we have great issues with the attaché carriages and fleet because they are costing a lot of money? And what assessment has he made? Because they are unable to, the cracks that have been caused is because of them becoming hybrid in nature. What confirmation can he give me that he is aware of this problem? What conversations is he having with his colleagues in the Department of Transport, and what is it costing? Thank you.
Well, Mr Speaker, I believe that this problem was actually quite well publicised, so I think we're all aware of it. The rolling stock is being examined. There's no issue around safety. I don't know what the costs are, and I understand the Honourable Lady's disappointment about electrification, but she will know through her sterling work on the Welsh Affairs Select Committee that there would have been enormous costs in electrification between Cardiff and Swansea and no actual benefits for any passengers in terms of decreased time. So what this government wants to do is spend that money where it's going to have the most impact and benefit for rail passengers.
Kearns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The community in St Athan, in my constituency, were naturally disappointed and even angry that the Welsh Government did not include a new station in the application to new stations funds from the Department for Transport. Can my honourable friend reassure me that he will listen to the views of members of Parliament as well as the Welsh Government when considering applications for new stations?
Well, I can absolutely reassure my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, on that particular point, and commend him also for the work he's done in improving rail infrastructure in his own constituency. And I enjoyed visiting Barry Station with him to see the new disability access improvements that had taken place sometime last year.
Vital Fabrica.
When the Minister listed all the projects that the government are undertaking, what he didn't mention was the marvellous work being done by Network Rail on the only wooden bridge in the country being used for rail services between Morfa Mawddach and Barmouth. Will my honourable friend make a point, together with the Secretary of State, of visiting the bridge when it is finally completed and all the wooden piles have been installed, and walk across the bridge, because of course it is a walkway as well as being a railway?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'd be delighted to take up the honourable gentleman on what I think is an invitation to a visit. I believe he may even be able to supply a cup of tea somewhere in the vicinity. But he's right, I didn't mention this particular project because there are so many projects I could mention that Network Rail are responsible for in Wales as a result of UK government funding. I also didn't mention the South Wales Relief Line or the North Wales Coastline or the hopeful improvements that will come about to the Wrexham Bidston Line or a whole host of other projects that are being funded by this UK government.
Jacob Young.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. One key way we are supporting rail infrastructure across the country is through HS2. Does the Minister agree with me that HS2 will have a truly nationwide benefit in places like Port Talbot and in Teesside if we use UK steel in its construction?
Well, Mr Speaker, of course, there'll be many companies in Wales who will be tendering for work on the HS2 project. So, of course, there'll be huge benefits to Wales, huge benefits for the railway industry, and, of course, huge benefits for the whole of the United Kingdom, because HS2 is also about getting people off the roads and onto the railways, which is something that anyone who supports getting Britain to net zero by 2050 should be in support of.
Mr West.
Question 3, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, I'd like to thank the honourable lady for that question on manufacturing, and just point out, which is somewhere in here, and assure that the UK government is completely committed to manufacturing in Wales, which is why we have put £3.4 billion, given the £3.4 billion into manufacturing, enable companies to take advantage of the many schemes which were brought forward during the COVID crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that response. Will the Minister join with me in welcoming the Welsh Labour Government's £20 million commitment to the Advanced Manufacturing Research Institute in Broughton, in the constituency of my right honourable friend, the member for Alyn and Deeside, which will attract business and boost skills across the North Wales region?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that I believe would be a promising scheme that could perhaps be looked at in conjunction with the growth deals. As the Honourable Lady will be aware, £790 million has been put forward for growth deals across Wales, and those are exactly the sorts of schemes which are being considered as part of it. And can I say how strongly I welcome the Honourable Lady's support for the aviation sector, which is something I hope will be shared by all of her colleagues.
Question 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 4 and 10 together. Wales' greenhouse gas emissions have fallen to close to 31% since 1990. To bring them down to zero, we'll be scaling up low-carbon power generation, kick-starting the hydrogen economy and transitioning to zero-emission vehicles.
Grateful for that response. Many parts of Wales are rural, like my own constituency in the Scottish borders. Now, these rural areas need a plentiful supply of electric car charging points to encourage people to make the switch to electric cars. So how is the UK Government supporting the switch across the 4 nations of the United Kingdom?
Well, I'm very grateful for the Honourable Gentleman's question, because it also illustrates a situation very similar to his in Wales. I hope he's as pleased as we are with the commitment to £275 million to the electric vehicle home charging scheme, workplace charging scheme, on-street residential charging scheme, and a number of other measures, all of which, of course, are UK-wide initiatives.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The drive to net zero presents huge challenges to industry all across South Wales, especially for us in Pembrokeshire, where the oil and gas plants support thousands of high-quality jobs. So what further steps can UK Government take to help the energy sector to adapt, taking advantage of new opportunities in hydrogen, but also plans for floating offshore wind? Because the truth is we're going to need significant extra help in Pembrokeshire if we're going to make that transition.
Hear, hear. Well, my right honourable friend raises a very important point. I hope he's taken note of the £20 million commitment to the South Wales Industrial Cluster. That's driving initiatives around carbon capture and similar initiatives. I and he frequently speak to big employers in our area like Valera on the Milford Haven Waterway, which is an absolutely critical part of our net zero ambitions in Wales. And of course, the floating offshore wind opportunities in the Celtic Sea are well known to both of us, and I hope that developers will be able to bid for contracts of difference later this year.
Shadow Minister Gerald Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to tackling climate crisis, I'm sure that the Secretary of State will agree with me that the Welsh Labour Government has led the way, banning fracking, legislating for net zero, establishing a new ministry for climate change and generating more than 50% of the energy we use from renewable sources, a figure higher than the UK average. But does the Secretary of State also agree that these efforts are undermined somewhat by his own government's decision to drop binding commitments on climate change from the free trade deal with Australia? And what message does this send to the world ahead of this country's hosting of the COP26 summit later this year?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't acknowledge his challenge in quite the way he would expect me to. I think it's been made perfectly clear that our net zero ambitions aren't going to be solved by one country or one government. It's going to be resolved by a very serious and joined up approach to net zero across the UK and beyond. I'm very happy, as he knows I am, to work with Welsh Government in achieving those aims. If we relegate this to some kind of political spat, that will make the challenges harder. And so I hope he will join with me and Welsh Government colleagues in trying to make sure that we achieve the mutual aims that we claim to share.
Grant Davis.
Yes, will the Secretary of State look at the recommendation from the Welsh Affairs Committee that Wales should get its fair share of HS2 funding, the same as Scotland, in order that we can invest in a modern infrastructure and meet net zero, in particular with the Swansea Bay Metro, more quickly?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman and I share many common ambitions as far as the rail network of Wales is concerned. He knows my views on that. He also knows Union Connectivity Review will be published shortly. I don't want to second guess what's in that, but I suspect he and I need a conversation shortly after that's been published.
Robin Miller.
Speaker, there's great potential for small-scale renewable energy schemes in the more rural parts of Aberconwy. What discussions has my right honourable friend had to ensure that the grid connections are in place to make these viable?
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, it's fair to say they're in their early stages. I enjoyed my visit to his constituency last week where these points were raised, but he's right to point out that we can come up with all the initiatives in the world, but unless there is a supportive grid to cope with that, we will be, our progress will be slower than we would like. So those conversations are in play, and I look forward to sharing them with him at the earliest opportunity.
Kevin Brennan.
Chief Pimp, number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I will answer questions 5 and 8 together. My discussions with the First Minister and his ministerial team are focused on how our respective governments can use the powers at our disposal to deliver jobs and economic growth for Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hijacking pots of money for Wales into UK government departments that haven't operated in Wales for 20 years undermines the devolution settlement and, by extension, the union. But just as damaging is the bureaucratic delay caused by the uselessness of UK ministers. Why have Welsh councils still not had a response on community fund renewal projects that are supposed to be completed by March 2022? If he and his ministerial colleagues can't do the business, they should get off the pot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to say that in the last 18 months or more, I have spoken to numerous individuals, charities, churches, universities, private and public sector, business, investor, you name them, we've spoken. Not a single one of them has raised the concerns that the Honourable Gentleman raises this morning. They are committed to the economic recovery plans that we're talking about. And as I said in answer to a previous question, if all of these sessions are to relegate these exchanges to some kind of cheap sort of political postcard, we will not make the progress that he seeks.
Beth Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The landslips in the Rhondda last year sent a shiver down the spine of the Valley's communities, and many of my constituents in Cynon Valley live in fear of future coal tip disasters. 300 of the 2,000 coal tips in Wales have been classed as having a high risk of endangering life or property. We need to know that they're safe, and UK government has a clear duty to make them safe. So can I please ask the Minister what discussion he has had with the Chancellor of the Exchequer ahead of the forthcoming spending review to ensure that sustainable funding is provided to deal with the legacy of the coal tips?
Well, thank you. I think I caught most of that question, but she will no doubt recall the fact that UK government did put over £30 million into coal tip renewal and coal tip safety issues. It was UK government that joined forces with Welsh government to make sure that that approach was collegiate and addressed all of the concerns which are raised and those which fall into the devolved space just as much as the reserve space. So I think if she wants an example of UK government and Welsh government working together and the Treasury picking up the tab, this issue is a perfect example of it.
Greg Williams.
Mr. Speaker, respecting devolution cuts both ways. Recently, the Welsh Government published a written statement on the evolution of the national grid. Very welcome, we need to work together, but clearly the 132 kV lines are UK competence. Can I ask the Secretary of State to pull Ofgem and the operators together to build and evolve the national grid with consensus from the people of Mid Wales?
Well, I can go a little further than that, Mr. Speaker, having spoken to the Business Secretary on this topic only yesterday evening. He raises a very important point, especially around where the devolution settlement sits and where reserve responsibilities sit. I think he's absolutely right to raise that, but it's also fair to say that on an issue of this significance, it will require a UK-wide approach, and of course the views and responsibilities of Welsh Government will be taken very seriously in those discussions.
David Linden.
Mr. Speaker, if the devolution settlement is to work, then the UK government's got to match its rhetoric on the Respect agenda. Given that all devolved governments in the UK have asked the UK government to cancel the cut to universal credit, can the Secretary of State say that he made that representation to his Cabinet colleagues, or is the post of Secretary of State just entirely redundant?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I barely caught a single word of that, but on the basis that I've heard the honourable gentleman's views on this subject before, I will simply repeat my views, which is over the last, and observations over the last 18 months during the COVID pandemic, there has been, I think, a very analytical look at what works and what doesn't work within the devolution settlement by businesses, employees, wealth creators, investors, universities, churches and members of the public. I have to say that this fixation with the niceties of the devolution settlements are not reflected by what business in Wales is doing for the moment. If by any chance, Mr. Speaker, I have missed the honourable gentleman's question, which by the shaking of his head I suspect I have, we can have a conversation in the tea room later.
Robert Halfon.
6, sir.
Mr. Speaker, we fully support the government's apprentice scheme. We have employed apprentices in the Wales office, and our most recent apprentice has just been promoted.
Right, Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend set out what he's doing to encourage apprenticeships across Wales? Will he ensure that all new jobs offered in the Welsh office are offered as apprenticeships, not just graduate schemes? And will he ensure that the Welsh office meets the public sector target on apprenticeships?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure my honourable friend that we will certainly meet the public sector target. We have been meeting it. We will be taking on further apprentices, and we've just taken on a kickstart worker and somebody from the Care Leavers scheme.
We now come to Prime Minister. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. I start with Caroline Noakes.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the whole House will want to join me in congratulating Emma Raducanu, Joe Salisbury, Alfie Hewitt and Gordon Reid for their victories in the US Open. They've made the whole nation proud. Mr. Speaker, on Battle of Britain Day, we honour the legacy of those brave air crews who defended our nation. I'm sure that members will also want to join me in wishing you well, Mr. Speaker, for the G7 Speakers and Presiding Officers Conference in Chorley later this week. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others in addition to my duties in this House. I shall have further such meetings later today.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like to pass on my condolences to the Prime Minister on the sad loss of his mother. Mr. Speaker, raising children is very expensive, more so when they are disabled. The children impacted by sodium valproate have suffered physically, mentally, and indeed financially. When the Cumberledge report was published, there was real hope that they would get support. However, on the last day before summer recess, a written ministerial statement indicated that recommendation 4 of that report would not be actioned. Can I please ask my right honourable friend to urge the Secretary of State for Health to look again at that and give the financial redress to the parents of those children that they so desperately need?
Well, friend, for her kind words. And on her substantive point, she's entirely right to raise the issues investigated by Baroness Cumberledge, and we've given the report full consideration and accept the overarching conclusions of the report, Mr. Speaker, and are committed to making rapid progress in addressing all the areas it mentions, including the one that she covers today.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about Emma Raducanu, a tremendous success in the US Opens, on the Battle of Britain and on the G7 Speakers Conference? And Mr. Speaker, can I also offer my condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his mother? As I know firsthand, losing a parent is never easy. Mr. Speaker, how many extra hours a week would a single parent working full-time on the minimum wage have to work to get back the £20 a week the Prime Minister plans to take away from them in his universal credit cuts?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I think it's. I thank the right honourable for his kind words. But on his substantive point about universal credit, Mr. Speaker, it is absurd because the Labour Party. I'll give you a statistic, Mr. Speaker. every single recipient of universal credit would lose their benefits under Labour because they want to abolish universal credit, Mr. Speaker. And I think that this House and this party should be, this government should be very proud of what we're doing and continue to do to support the low-paid. And it was another Conservative institution, the living wage, Mr. Speaker, that increased the incomes of families on the living wage by £4,000 a head, Mr. Speaker. What they want to do, Mr. Speaker, is keep this country in lockdown, keep this country in furlough without moving forward at all.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister didn't answer the question. The Work and Pension Secretary seems to think it's an extra 2 hours a week. So let me make it even easier for the Prime Minister. Is the correct answer higher or lower than that?
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that under this government, for the first time in decades, wages are rising, Mr. Speaker. Wages across the board are rising, and they're 4.1% up on where they were before the pandemic. In fact, I'm very pleased. Of course, what they want to do is to continue to take money in taxation and put it into benefits. We don't think that's the right way, Mr. Speaker. We want to encourage high wages and high skills, Mr. Speaker. And that is the difference between this government and the Labour Party opposite. I think it is a good thing. I think it's a good thing, for instance, that Costa Coffee is now paying 5% more than they were before the pandemic. And never forget, if we listened to Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, Costa Coffee would still be closed.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't a difficult question. The answer to the question, maybe it's silly, they say. It's a silly question. How much would somebody working full-time on the minimum wage have to, how many hours they'd have to work to make up for the cut, is apparently a silly question. The answer, I'll give the Prime Minister the answer to the question. It is much, much higher. A single parent could be a constituent working on the minimum wage, already working full-time, would need to work over 9 hours a week on top of their full-time job just to get the money back that the Prime Minister had taken away from them. Prime Minister, they are already working full-time. They've got kids. How on earth does the Prime Minister think they're going to find the time to work an extra 9 hours? In truth, Mr. Speaker, an extra day every week. How, Prime Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I tell you what we're doing to support people on low incomes, not only with the living wage, but 30 hours of free childcare, freezing petrol duty, Mr. Speaker, extending the cost of heating allowance for 780,000 people across this country. But even more important than that, Mr. Speaker, for the low-paid, what we're doing is seeing encouraging measures to see their wages rise. We're investing in their skills, Mr. Speaker. We're investing in work coaches, Mr. Speaker. And there's a dividing line now between this government and the opposition. We want a high-wage, high-skill economy with controlled immigration, Mr. Speaker. And what they want is low wages, low skills, and uncontrolled immigration. That's what they stand for.
Let's test that right now. We've had 3 questions and the Prime Minister hasn't answered one of them. And it's obvious why. The truth is that these low-paid workers can't work longer hours to get back the money the Prime Minister is cutting from them. He knows it. They know it. Millions of working families will be hit hard, very hard, by the Prime Minister's universal credit cut. And the reason, Prime Minister, is this. Why would they have to work an extra 9 hours, a full day every week, to get that £20 back? It's because of his broken tax system. He's just said how good it is. So let's test it. After his national insurance rise, for every extra pound that these workers earn, his government will take more than 75 pence from them. That's why they have to work for 9 hours one day. Why is the Prime Minister He's just said how he's going to raise wages, what he's going to do. That's the situation. Why is the Prime Minister making a bad situation worse for working people by hammering them with a cut to universal credit and a tax rise?
Mr. Speaker, actually what we've done with our local housing alliance is increase by £600 the amount of money to be available to exactly the type of person that he mentions. But he attacks the plan, Mr. Speaker. He attacks our plan to fix the backlogs in the NHS that we announced last week. And I have to say, I thought it was utterly incredible that the party of Nye Bevan should have come to this House last Wednesday and voted against measures that would fix the NHS, Mr. Party. Mr. Speaker, it's quite clear that this is now the party of the NHS. They simply do not have a plan, Mr. Speaker. They don't have a plan for universal credit. They want to abolish it, and they don't have a plan to fix the NHS or social care, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, an unfair tax rise which won't fix social care and won't clear the NHS backlog is not a plan, Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister pretends. He pretends he's no alternative but to hammer working people with tax rises and universal credit cuts. But that's not true. His approach means that a working single parent who's a qualified nurse would lose £1,143. A supermarket worker could lose £1,093. A teaching assistant could lose £1,081. But at the same time, the Prime Minister wasted billions on crony contracts, cut taxes for people buying second homes, and handed out super tax deduction for the biggest companies. That's not taking, Mr. Speaker, that's not taking difficult decisions, that's making political choices. So why is the Prime Minister choosing to take a tax system that's already loaded against working people and making it even more unfair?
Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely ridiculous that he should attack the government over salaries for nurses when we put them up by 3%, Mr. Speaker, on top of the 12.8% rise that we introduced, when we're hiring 50,000 more nurses, Mr. Speaker, and when we're just putting another £36 billion into the NHS and social care on top of the £33 billion that this government invested when we came into office. We are... Mr. Speaker, 1 in 10 of the people in this country is now on an NHS waiting list. They know that the NHS backlog needs to be fixed. They know that this government has a plan, and they know that Labour has got absolutely nothing to say.
Keir Starmer.
I just wonder what the millions of people facing a £1,000 cut or on low wages will think of that. This country's success is built by working people, but the tax system is loaded against them. The Prime Minister may not understand the pressures facing families across the country, but we do. And the reality is this: taxes on working people up, national insurance up, council tax up, energy bills, food prices, burdens on families up, up, up. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, needs to get real and understand the terrible impact of his decisions on working people across this country. Mr. Speaker, this afternoon he has the chance to change course, to vote with Labour to cancel a cut to universal credit, and then to stop clobbering working people with unfair tax rises. Will he do so?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me tell. I think the panto season has come early. So let me tell him. Growth. Which country?
Order. If it is, it's certainly behind you, Prime Minister.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Speaker, since you're a man of great restraint and taste and judgment, which country has the fastest growth in the G7? Where is employment? Up, Mr. Speaker. Where are job vacancies at the highest level? Up, Mr. Speaker. As for wages, Mr. Speaker, they are up. Higher than they were before the pandemic. I've listened to the right honourable gentleman very carefully over the last fortnight. I'm told that he has a 14,000-word essay in gestation, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why he can't produce it right away. I mean, why does the world have to wait for the thoughts of Chairman Keir? Having listened to what he's had to say, his non-existent plan for benefits, for universal credit, his non-existent plan for health and social care, I can compress those 14,000 words to 4, Mr. Speaker. Vote Labour, wait longer. That's what he stands for, Mr. Speaker. Our plan for jobs is working, Mr. Speaker. Our plan for COVID is working.
Hey, come on, Cheryl. The Minister needs to count the number of words. Come on, Cheryl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, be it farm workers or lorry drivers, my employers are saying they want more staff. What more can the Prime Minister do to increase the training and mobility of job seekers to help them into the jobs they need?
I thank my honourable friend, and she's absolutely right to point out to the problem of lorry driver shortages, which is affecting the whole world, from Europe to North America. What we're doing immediately is, of course, working to get out more licences. We're taking advantage of a post-Brexit freedom, I can tell the House, so that all the young thrusters on these benches here with a post-97 driver's licence can now drive a vehicle with a trailer as well. Everybody can drive a vehicle with a trailer as well. But what we're also seeing, Mr. Speaker, after a long period of stagnation in wages for those in the road haulage industry, we're also seeing an increase, a long overdue increase in wages. And that, Mr. Speaker, is part of the same phenomenon that this government is introducing and they are opposing.
Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I pass on my condolences to the Prime Minister and his family for the sad loss of his mother the other day. And, of course, I join with the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition on congratulating Emma Raducanu for her fantastic success in New York last Saturday. And, of course, we mourn the anniversary last Saturday of 20 years since the horrors of 9/11. We remember all of those that paid the sacrifice and that outrage that took place. Mr. Speaker, this morning we learned that the rate of inflation has reached its highest level in a decade. For ordinary workers and families, prices are going up at the very moment when they can least afford it. Workers and families need more than just a winter plan for COVID. They need a winter action plan to fight a Tory poverty pandemic that is only going to get worse. So, does the Prime Minister know, and can he tell us, how much Tory government cuts to social welfare will cost the average nurse?
Mr. Speaker, what we're doing is protecting people on low incomes up and down the country, and indeed we are freezing fuel duties, supporting childcare, and of course by the huge package of measures that we've brought in, not least that the living wage, which will see an increase of £4,000, is already seeing an increase of £4,000 for every family on the living wage. But more importantly than that, he talks about the income of a nurse, Mr. Speaker. What we're doing is investing massively in health and social care up and down the country, which will help to fund, apart from anything else, Mr. Speaker, the increase in nurses' pay that they so thoroughly deserve. And I hope he will support that package.
Ian Blackford.
My goodness, Mr. Speaker, an increase in nurses' pay. Either the Prime Minister doesn't know or he simply doesn't care. Because when you take the cuts to universal credit and you take the increase in national insurance, Prime Minister, the figure you were looking for is that the average nurse will lose £1,736. Once again, this government is cutting the pay of key workers, the very people that we are relying on to see us through another difficult winter. The cost of living is spiralling, and people are being left with a Prime Minister who doesn't know how much his cuts are hitting key workers, and a Secretary of State for Welfare that doesn't know how universal credit works. Mr Speaker, if any Scottish Tories are in a possession of a backbone, now would be a good time to find it. Does the Prime Minister expect any MPs from his Scottish branch office to stand against the callous cuts to universal credit? Or has the Prime Minister already bought them off with promises of jobs in his reshuffle?
Well, Mr Speaker, actually what's happening is that we're funding the NHS across the whole of the UK, including in Scotland, I'm proud to say, with record sums. And we've ensured that nurses have access to a training bursary worth £5,000, a further bursary £3,000 for childcare costs, Mr Speaker, and we have put up, and that is before we put up their pay by 3%, Mr Speaker. So we are, and that is only possible because of the investment that we're making, the measures that I outlined last week, the package that we're putting forward for health and social care. And if he's really saying, Mr Speaker, if he's really saying that the Scottish Nationalist Party are opposed to that investment, if he's really saying he would send it back, Mr Speaker, then I think he's better off banging on as he normally does about a referendum, because he's better on that.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now that the move to have a domestic ID card for each of Northern Ireland, Wales, England and Scotland has started, what consideration has my right honourable friend given to how the Nationalists will use them to break our union?
I'm very grateful to the vigilance of my honourable friend about the matter of ID cards. I can tell him that we have absolutely no plans to bring them in, but I will watch them very carefully, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, can I too offer my condolences to the Prime Minister on the loss of his mother. Health waiting lists are through the roof in Northern Ireland. Hard-pressed families are being hit by decisions from this government. But the DUP has been hit by a bad opinion poll, so they're threatening to bring down the very institutions of the Good Friday Agreement. Will this Prime Minister commit today to fast-tracking the legislation going through this House, agreed at NDNA, to stop the institutions coming down if one political party has a petulant strop?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I agree with him. It's very important that the institutions of Northern Ireland should be robust and that they should continue. But I also think that a responsible government has to address the issues of the protocol, the lopsidedness, and the way the way in which the EU has chosen to interpret them, and that I do not believe satisfies the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and that's what we're going to do.
Christian Wakeford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I start by also expressing my condolences to the Prime Minister? Mr Speaker, as the Prime Minister knows, yesterday I led a Westminster Hall debate about the British fur trade and the import of dead animal products from abroad. I know my right honourable friend cares deeply about animal welfare. Will he please join me in denouncing the horrible, cruel and unnecessary slaughter of an average of 1 million animals every year just for their skin? In a post-Brexit Britain, we can outlaw this horrible practice, a practice that I'm sure he and many, many others of British people hate. Will he meet with me to discuss my campaign to end the import of fur to Britain and truly make a fur-free Britain?
I'm sure, Mr Speaker, that my honourable friend speaks for millions and millions of people up and down this country who abhor the fur trade and don't want to wear fur. Obviously, we've banned the fur farming in this country for a long time, Mr Speaker, and we're going to look at what we can do, working with the fur sector, to understand what we can do to prevent fur being imported into Britain.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. By the time my wonderful friend Linda went to the doctor, the cancer was already so advanced that she only had a few weeks to live. Many honourable members have been through cancer, and they know well that early detection saves lives. Yeah. And unfortunately, of course, long waiting lists will make it more difficult to save lives. The real problem we have is we have a massive shortage in the number of thousands, in the number of pathologists and radiologists to catch the cancers in the first place, and a massive shortage of oncologists and dermatologists to do the treatment. So regardless of the money, how are we going to make sure that we've got the personnel, not in 5 years' time or 7 years' time, but now, to be able to save lives?
First of all, I want to say how sad I am to hear about his constituent, Linda, and her experiences, I think, have been shared by literally millions of people in this country during the pandemic, because they haven't been willing or able to get the oncology treatment that they need because of the pressure of COVID on the system. The system is now coming back, trying to help everybody as fast as possible to fix the backlogs. And so, yes, it's necessary to hire more nurses and more doctors, and there are about 10,000 more nurses now, about 6,000 more doctors. And he's right in what he says. Totally right in what he says about radiologists and pathologists. But if I can just respectfully say to the right honourable gentleman, that must be done by means of the big, powerful package that we put forward last week to raise the funding necessary, which I believe that his party should have supported, and I think it's incredible that they didn't.
Tom Randall.
Mr. Speaker, work continues to improve maternity services at Nottingham University hospitals, and last week local MPs heard from those affected in a meeting with the Minister for Patient Safety, including from a former constituent of mine whose baby died only 8 weeks ago. Will my right honourable friend agree that it's right that there's going to be an independent review into local maternity services, and will he join me in asking for those affected to come forward to give evidence to that review, so that in the future mothers across Nottinghamshire get the maternity services that they both need and deserve?
Yes, I thank my honourable friend for raising this matter. I know that he's campaigned on this. The review is going ahead. We will look at what to do once it has been completed. But in the meantime, Nottingham University's hospitals are going to be supported through the National Maternity Safety Support Programme.
Olivia Blake.
Mr. Speaker, across the country there are children who haven't gone back to school because their schools say they can't meet their needs. Do the continued delays to the government's SEND review mean that the government has abandoned these children, and will the Prime Minister listen to the concerns of parents and young people and make sure their voices are heard in this review?
I'm very grateful to her. She's raising a very important point. But when this government came in, a key part of the £14 billion extra that we put into education was to invest in special educational needs, to allow local areas to build more SEND schools where they were necessary, and putting in another £780 million in extra SEND education for our kids. If there's a particular shortfall in a particular school, particular area that she wishes to raise, then please write to me about it.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, I know that my right honourable friend wants to see the United Kingdom growing more crops. We're not going to blaze a trail to self-sufficiency by building over our finest agricultural land. That's got to stop now. On this back British Farming Day, we're at harvest time. And Mr. Speaker, all is not safely gathered in. In 3 weeks, Thanet Earth in my constituency, one of the largest glasshouse companies in the country, growing tomatoes, has had to trash £320,000 worth of produce because of no pickers and no drivers. Because of a lack of labour force, the crops are rotting in the fields and on our trees. Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend seek to introduce immediately a COVID recovery visa so that this year's crops are not lost?
I thank my right honourable friend, and he's absolutely right in what he says about the importance of buying British and eating British. Our food is the best in the world. He's right also to address the problems in the supply chain that we're currently seeing, but we are taking steps. And of course, this has been a problem for a long time. But what we have is the seasonal agricultural workers scheme, which we will use to ensure that British farms get the labour that they need, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I add my condolences to the Prime Minister and his family. Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister believe that burning fossil fuels will not be a source of energy in the UK in the future?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and just since 2012, when I think I was Mayor of London, we have cut. We've cut CO2. We've cut our dependence. We've cut CO2 massively. But we've cut our dependence on coal from, I think, 40% to less than 1%. How about that, Mr. Speaker?
To Neil Hudson.
You, Mr. Speaker. Ullswater Community College, led superbly by head teacher Stephen Gilby, is a fantastic school in Penrith with 1,500 pupils, over 200 staff and a 600 square mile catchment area. The school is in desperate need of redevelopment to keep the site fit for purpose. In partnership with Myerscough College, the school is providing a lifeline for land-based education in Cumbria after the sad closure of Newtonrigg College in July. As a great opportunity for the government to level up rural areas, will the Prime Minister join me in supporting the proposed rebuild of Ullswater Community College?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend, who's a great campaigner for the people of Penrith and the border. But what I can tell him is that in addition to our support for the 500 school projects in the next rebuilding projects in the next decade, we're doing 100 immediately. And for the financial year 21-22, Mr. Speaker, Cumbria County Council has been allocated £5.3 million, Mr. Speaker, to improve buildings, including Ullswater Community College.
Kim Leadbeater.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister agree with me that the impending cuts to universal credit will not just have a devastating financial impact on people, but will also lead to stress and anxiety and undoubtedly have a hugely detrimental effect on their mental health, which on top of the pressures of the pandemic could prove devastating for some?
Mr. Speaker, I've answered this many times, but the answer is no. And in any case, Labour would abolish universal credit altogether, Mr. Speaker.
Bill.
Back in 2004, Scarborough hit the national headlines when rumours of a new dental practice opening led to hundreds of people queuing round the block in the vain hope of registering as NHS patients. Today, whilst many better-off families continue to enjoy the discounted prices that the NHS offers, many children and vulnerable families still can't register as NHS dental patients in Scarborough-Whitby. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that this needs fixing?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I totally agree. That's why we're investing in the NHS, and we want the NHS to be a better place for the dental profession, Mr. Speaker. Wouldn't it be a fine thing if this House of Commons voted overwhelmingly, with all members voting for our package of measures to support the NHS?
Adam Keir-Starmer.
Here. Mr. Speaker, September marks Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Every day across the UK, 12 children and young people will be diagnosed with cancer, and of those 12, 2 will not survive. My constituent, Nadia Majid, and her family are campaigning to improve research and funding in this field. Nadia's son, Rehan, was only 4 years old when he was diagnosed with an aggressive brain tumour. Rehan tragically passed away only 4 months after his diagnosis. So I asked the Prime Minister, will he join me in thanking all the doctors, nurses and support staff who worked tirelessly to fight against childhood cancer? And will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss how the 4 nations can work together to improve research and funding into childhood cancers and support families like Nadia's?
Yes, I know that she echoes the thoughts of millions of people. There's not a family in this country that hasn't been touched by cancer. Childhood cancer is particularly tragic, and that's why the government is investing huge sums in research, but also in supporting some of the fantastic charities that she mentions, particularly those investigating brain cancers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Camilla Kingdon, the President of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, thinks that the routine testing of children without COVID symptoms
is still interrupting children and teenagers' school attendance, and they don't believe it should continue. She thinks COVID should be treated like other diseases and you only deal with children with symptoms. I agree with Dr Kingdon and her colleagues in the Royal College. Can I ask the Prime Minister if he does as well?
Mr Speaker, I have great respect for Dr Kingdon and indeed, as I have indeed for my right honourable friend. It's one of a number of views in the scientific community, Mr Speaker, but we continue to think that testing is a very important route for keeping schools open, Mr Speaker, which I believe is the best possible thing for the physical and mental health of our kids.
Nadia Witt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My condolences to the Prime Minister on the sad loss of his mother. Mr Speaker, I was privileged to be able to take the time off work that I needed to recover from PTSD. But that should be a right for everyone, not a privilege. But far too many people aren't able to take the time off that they need because, by the former Health Secretary's own admission, statutory sick pay at £95 a week is not enough to live on. So a simple question, yes or no, will the Prime Minister today commit to full sick pay at a real living wage, not the government's current age-restricted minimum wage?
Well, Mr Speaker, what we have done, as the whole House will know, is make sure that everybody who gets COVID-related statutory sick pay gets it on day one. But we've also ensured that most people in this country, when they fall sick or when they need to recover, as the Honourable Lady has, do receive considerably more than statutory sick pay.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As a Queen's Scout, I'm always keen to encourage young people to get into the most successful youth organisation in the world. So last week, I was delighted that the Scout Association has released and announced the first new age range for Scouting for 35 years, namely the Squirrels, which allows young people of 4 and 5 years old to become part of the Scout movement. It is particularly aimed at areas of deprivation and disadvantaged children. So will my right honourable friend agree with me that we should congratulate the Scout Association, thank the volunteers who give up their time to enable young people to do so, and encourage young people to get involved in a safe environment for adventure and new challenges?
Yes, Mr. Bill. What a wonderful! I had no idea that that the Scouts Association was doing that, but I think it's fantastic. The uniformed youth services make a huge difference to outcomes for young people. I think it's fantastic that the Squirrels are now starting them off at the age of 4.
You've registered Wilfred. Let's go to Jack Dromey.
Mr Speaker, for over half a century, the GKN factory in Erdington has produced high-quality parts for the automotive industry. Now, following the hostile takeover by Melrose, the company has announced its intention to close the factory, sack 519 workers, and export jobs and production to continental Europe. Now, Prime Minister, there's been some welcome engagement with ministers around this issue. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that in one of the poorest parts of Britain, if the levelling up agenda means anything, this factory cannot close? If support for British manufacturing means anything, this factory cannot close? And does the Prime Minister therefore agree with me that it would be a betrayal of the British national interest were this great historic factory to become history?
Mr Speaker, I know that my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is working with GKN to do whatever we can. But I can also tell them I believe the future for the UK automotive sector is incredibly bright. And that is because this, to get to the question from the Honourable Lady from the Liberal Democrats, this is the government that took the historic step ahead of every other European country to move towards electric vehicles by 2030. And we want this country to be in the lead. We're making sure that we get the investment in the UK that will drive new technology and drive growth and drive high-wage, high-skilled jobs in this country.
Dr. Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Prime Minister, at a time where our economy desperately needs investment, right now we are missing out on hundreds of millions of pounds of private capital flowing into the geothermal sector across Europe. because the UK does not offer a competitive long-term tariff. Geothermal will help us heat homes, create jobs and level up the UK. I know we haven't yet found time to meet to discuss this, but can the Prime Minister find time in his diary in coming weeks so we can discuss this issue so we don't miss out on further investment?
I thank my honourable friend. I'm sorry that we haven't yet had time to discuss this properly, person to person, but I can tell you the government is very, very much interested in what he says in geothermal projects, so I'll make sure that a meeting is arranged as soon as possible.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I am sure that the Prime Minister will be as pleased as I am that this week the Scottish Land Court has given the green light, the final green light, to establishing a space launch facility in Sutherland. This is something that's great for the UK, and it's time to bury part of political differences. On behalf of the delighted crofters of the community of Melness, I extend a warm invitation to the Prime Minister to come to the first launch. He will be given a delicious Highland tea, including some homemade scones.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can't thank the honourable gentleman for his kind invitation. I look forward to taking it up. What we need, Mr. Speaker, is a suitable payload to send into space, and I think the gentleman opposite would do very well.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, it was a pleasure to meet with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Leicester as they discussed a zero-carbon future with British Gas. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the development in neighbouring Derby of modular nuclear reactors also can play a major part in this zero-carbon future? What steps is the government taking to facilitate the rollout of this technology to the UK and the world, especially this week, Mr. Speaker, which is Nuclear Week, perhaps in more ways than one?
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend. We have already working with Rolls-Royce. We gave £20 million seed money to the Rolls-Royce-led consortium when this government first came in to help them to develop their SMR design. But, Mr. Speaker, as I think I said to my honourable friend the other day, we want to see that company coming forward with a fully worked-out plan, a fully worked-out business case that we can all get behind.
Very good.
The Prime Minister has set out today that he wanted a high-skill, high-wage economy. He has also been on the record as saying that the tactic of fire and rehire is unacceptable. Surely the best way of ensuring that we have a high-wage economy is to work with the private members' bill to make sure that we do end that tactic of fire and rehire.
Mr. Speaker, the most vivid example of fire and rehire is that conducted by the Labour Party. If I recall, the leader of the Labour Party himself fired his deputy leader and then rehired her as Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Mr. Speaker, and Shadow Secretary of State for the Future of Work. Mr. Speaker, the future of work under Labour is low wages, low skills, driven by uncontrolled immigration. The people of this country have had enough of that. What they want to see is high wages, high skills, controlled immigration, and that's what this government is committed to deliver.
Chair of the Agriculture, Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend come to number 1 George Street and celebrate great British farming today? And can we have public procurement that is British food? And can we have food envoys all across the world promoting our great British food and farming?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I will thank my honourable friend, who is a living embodiment of the robustness of British agriculture. Is the living embodiment of the robustness of British, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, of the benefits of English food, of British food, Mr. Speaker. In particular, Devon, in particular, the beef of Devon, and I know, or Somerset. I know, Mr. Speaker, that he's right in what he says about food envoys. We've taken it up. Every single embassy across the world has a food envoy.
Final question, Sarah Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents live in Bridge House, Croydon, and their flats are covered in dangerous cladding that will cost millions to remove. They are not eligible for the government's building safety fund because it's the wrong type of cladding. Can the Prime Minister confirm, do my constituents have to pay the £23,000 each that they are being charged to remove this cladding, or does he have a better plan?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable lady's constituents are being told that they do not have to remove that cladding, then the answer is no. And I think it's very, very important that this House should recognise that too many buildings have been unnecessarily, unfairly, I believe, categorised as dangerous and unsafe. Yes, of course we must remove dangerous cladding, and we're doing that. But I want householders, I want leaseholders I want people living in flats across this country to have the confidence that they can do so in safety, and that is what this government is doing.
We're now coming to the 10-minute rule bill. If people can leave quickly, I will then start the next business. Sure, Alva, good to see you. Right. All right. Welcome back. See you back.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you, Lindsay. I didn't think you was going to let me get in, did you?
I know. Right, let's start with the 10-minute rule bill. Olivia Blake.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision for and in connection with offences relating to verbal and physical abuse of public-facing workers in the course of their employment. Abuse is a regular occurrence, unfortunately. I've been sworn at, spat at, pushed, had trolleys rammed into me, had grown men tell me they will rape and kill me. I have plenty of colleagues that have been assaulted. One had a man wait in the car park for him and smash a glass bottle over his head. That's one constituent's account of the abuse they face at work, but there is more. I've had threats to smash my face in, and threats such as stabbing, threats to my family, punching, needles, threats to follow me home, waiting around until I finished work, arson, and generally abusive shouting and swearing and spitting. These stories are a part of a wider pattern that goes beyond only one section of the economy or one type of workplace. Many people have looked in horror at the footage from Asda and Clapham, which showed the man brutally attacking workers and customers at that store. My own union, the GMB, is campaigning for stronger legal protections for workers because of these assaults. I've also heard from cabin crew workers who have suffered rising levels of abuse as they try to enforce social distancing protocols on planes, journalists facing increasing harassment, abuse and even assault by far-right groups, NHS workers being accosted by anti-vaxxers and COVID deniers while they are going about treating the sick, librarians who are facing rising levels of abusive behaviour, workers in bars and restaurants facing violence and intimidation from customers, and transport workers, often working alone, who have been spat at, threatened and physically assaulted. Everywhere, rising levels of abuse directed at people who work with the public. Last June, a survey conducted by the Institute of Customer Services found that more than half of customer-facing employees have experienced increased hostility from customers during the coronavirus crisis. More than half of the participants in the survey from the RMT reported being threatened with physical violence. 88% had been verbally abused, 13% had reported being racially harassed, and 16% being spat at or targeted with other bodily fluids. In a survey in 2010, Usdaw reported very similar. COVID has made us, this growing problem even worse, but it would be a mistake to think that this is the cause. Before the outbreak, the 2020 crime report found that 83% of people in convenience store sectors have been subject to verbal abuse. It is estimated that there has been more than 50,000 incidents of violence. Some of the responsibility lies with individuals. We need to see a change in behaviour and a culture of how we treat front-facing workers. That change won't happen on its own, and part of our discussion should include what employers can do to protect workers. We need better reporting, support and a more robust pursuit of prosecutions, but we also need to see government take action. Today with this bill, I'm here to propose that a verbal or physical abuse of public-facing workers carrying out their duties has to be made its own specific offence. There are some who say we already have enough on the statute book on this, that there are already laws to take together to cover the offences of abusing frontline staffs, but our laws reflect and shape our society. If the existing legislation reflects the situation in which we are seeing spiralling levels of abuse, then it is time that we changed it, because the status quo simply isn't working. The British Retail Consortium reports that only 6% of incidents of violence and abuse ended in prosecution, and only 3% of cases was the victim performing a public service as an aggravating factor. The lack of action has consequences. In a survey conducted by the RMT, 43% of respondents said they hadn't reported the incidents to their managers. When asked why, the most common reason was that they didn't feel it would be taken seriously or that it was just part of their job. A quarter said that they had reported incidents and no action had been taken. Usdaw found similar, with a survey saying a quarter of their members had never reported abuse they suffered and that it was a regular occurrence. The most recent polling of the Institute of Customer Surveying reports nearly half of workers who participated in a survey do not report incidents of abuse. Over half of those who had been abused didn't think it would make the difference. And why would you when the rate of prosecution is so low? No wonder the system isn't working. The sentencing for common assault is complicated. There are 3 categories of harm and culpability, 19 aggravating factors and 11 mitigating factors. A new law would make the process far simpler. We've already seen how it could look in practice. The 2018 Assaults on Emergency Workers Offences Act, the Protect the Protectors Act, provides a good template. The Act was a welcome step forward, but the law has been applied inconsistently. For example, the Prison Officers Association told me that it's been unevenly applied to their context of work, with different rulings classing prison officers as emergency workers or not. Similarly, social workers are often required to engage in emergency work, but they are not included in the Act. However, they are protected while enforcing child protection orders or carrying out mental health assessments in Scotland under the Emergency Workers Scotland Act 2005. These inconsistencies would appear if the law encompassed, would disappear if the law encompassed all public-facing workers. Creating a new offence would simplify the legal process, iron out the existing inconsistency and encourage law enforcement to proactively investigate and support complainants against perpetrators. It would also mean empowering frontline workers to speak up and report incidents of abuse, knowing there is a greater chance that they will be listened to and investigated. It should be an inalienable right to be treated with respect and dignity in your workplace. But many people feel they are ignored by a system which doesn't care about them or take them seriously. Today is our opportunity to demonstrate that we do, and that this is why I commend the bill to this House.
Yeah. The member has the leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
Andrew Gwynn, Belle Ribeiro Addy, Rachel Hopkins, Kim Johnson, Navenda Mishra, Kate Osborne and myself, Mr Speaker.
Yeah. Olivia Manning. Patricia, move on.
Got there.
Great, thanks so much.
Abuse of public-facing workers' offences bill.